I'm a bit of a weirdo in many ways, in the sense that I used to work as a church minister, but I've always loved horror and scary things and spooky things. And people sometimes have a bit of a disconnect when they hear that, because they think, well, surely you're supposed to be like a professional, nice person.
There are tales of rogues and wars, of stratagems and wars. There's a tale for every season of the year. There are tales of knights and queens, of drudgery and dreams. There's a tale for everybody here. There are stories galore, in volumes by the score, on every subject throughout history. It's all waiting in Pandora's library.
Welcome to Pandora's Library, the monthly pod where I interview authors who write about the stranger things in life. My name is Karen Hamilton-Vile. I'm a paranormal murder mystery author of a series of books about Ada Baker, a medium who solves murders with the aid of the ghost she lives with. This month I'm interviewing Peter Laws, an ordained minister, author, journalist and YouTuber. His paranormal YouTube channel, Into the Fog, has achieved great success over the last couple of years, terrifying listeners with spooky true tales. He can also be found as an expert on the Uncanny podcast with Danny Robbins. He writes a column for the Fortean Times, one of the foremost paranormal magazines. He's the author of his Matt Hunter series and his non-fiction book, The Frighteners. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hello, Karen. Nice to join you on your podcast. Thanks for inviting me.
So we first met at the ASAP Paranormal Conference. And
we did.
You kindly gave me a quote for the book of my second novel, which is very nice of you. Thank you. And I'd like to start by looking at your non-fiction book, The Frighteners.
Oh, yes.
Can you enlighten us what it's all about, please?
Yeah, The Frighteners. Hang on a minute. I'll grab a copy. The Frighteners is basically... I'm a bit of a weirdo in many ways, in the sense that I used to work as a church minister, but I've always loved horror and scary things and spooky things. And people sometimes have a bit of a disconnect when they hear that, because they think, well, surely you're supposed to be like a professional, nice person. Why would you want to be drawn to dark things and death and horror and gore, violence even, fictionalized? And I always have been. I've always found those topics to be very fascinating. And I decided, when I had been ordained for quite a while, I thought, wait a minute, I'd like to work out why I'm attracted to this, not only to answer it for myself, but perhaps on behalf of millions of other people, because I know I'm not alone. Millions of other people who are really nice, normal, everyday people. They don't want to kill anyone. They don't want to die. They're not obsessed in that sort of way. But I wanted to discover, why do people, nice people, like scary, horrible things? And so that book was kind of a quest for me to go on, traveling around in kind of Transylvania and Rome and across Britain, meeting morbid people and celebrating the healthiness of morbid culture.
So that sort of leads into my other question, which was, what inspired you to write The Frighteners? So is it purely your personal love of horror?
Well, actually, it was actually, funnily enough, what really inspired me to write The Frighteners was because I initially started writing fiction. So I've got a toothpick here. I'll get rid of that. I was originally writing fiction, and I got an agent, a literary agent for my fiction quite early. And I thought, well, hey, here we go. Time to start walking straight into a traditional publishing deal, because I'd read that getting an agent was harder than getting a book deal. Turns out, no, that's not the case. It was still really hard to get a book deal. And so what was happening was, after my agent sent round my novel to lots of publishers, I thought, you know what, I guess this is not going to work. Maybe I'm not going to get any fiction deal ever. And so, as a backup, I said to my agent, how about I come up with it? Let's forget that, and I'll come up with a nonfiction idea. And so that's where The Frighteners came from, which was just a backup idea, which was something I was passionate about. But I thought, obviously, I'm not going to get a fiction deal. And so we went and did The Frighteners. And she sent that off. But ironically, not long after I got a 2-book fiction deal, which was amazing. But then a couple of months after that, this nonfiction idea that I'd had as a backup got commissioned by a publisher and said, we'd like you to write this. So it was amazing to have the opportunity to actually go deep into a subject that's always fascinated me. But yeah, being honest, the initial push was the lonely road of fiction rejection, which I'm sure lots of people know about what that's like.
Yeah. And lots of writers do, I think, unfortunately. But I had no idea that was the reason.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important for us all to understand our love of horror?
Well, I think it's important because we live our lives. Sometimes it depends on your personality, but you can. Some people more than others will assess themselves and kind of sometimes be quite harsh, I think, on themselves and have I mean, everyone has different issues, but some people have like low self-esteem or they have anxiety or all these sorts of thoughts. And what I've always struggled with is the thought of putting unfair pressure on yourself. Yes, of course, there's things like, oh man, maybe I should exercise more. Or these sorts of things, I think, reasonable pressure to have. I should stop drinking a bottle of whiskey every night. Like, actually, yes, you shouldn't drink that. So certain pressures are right and correct, I think, to have. But a lot of it's unfair. And I do think that people who like morbid culture, if they're particularly from a religious background, can put on pressure on themselves, which I think is just not needed, because they'll assume, and understandably so, well, am I? Is there something wrong with me? I'm a sicko. Do I enjoy suffering of other people? Am I evil? Why do I enjoy, reading about serial killers or shooting zombies' heads off with shotguns in a video game? And for some people, they can get quite sensitive about that and worry there's something wrong. And yes, particularly in the religious communities, because they are just so black and white, sadly, when it comes to things like horror. And so that's why I think it's important to check whether or not that pressure is warranted. And I don't think it is. I think it's the opposite. I think morbid culture, and this is what the book explores, is a necessary part of the human psychological journey. And we have it to help us get death in perspective and to deal with fears in manageable ways.
I used to work for a Christian charity years ago, which I won't mention its name, but even like Harry Potter books,
intrigued.
they wouldn't allow those to be given to children because they thought they were. I'm not quite sure actually what they thought they were going to do to people. But I like a good horror, werewolf horror movie myself.
Yeah,
American Werewolf in London. That's my sort of a jam.
Yes, yeah. Or The Howling. I was like The Howling, which came out. Or Silver Bullet is a great Stephen King, 1985. Yeah, I love werewolves. I find werewolves scarier than vampires.
Wait, yeah, because you can reason with a vampire, but you can't reason with a werewolf.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of think, obviously, if you became a vampire, there are some positives to that. Whereas becoming a werewolf, not so keen. But actually, I mean, in the Frighteners, there's a chapter on why monsters are attractive, but not only that, but why we might want to become monsters, but why the idea of becoming a vampire, or the liberation, perhaps, of even allowing your kind of animalistic side to come out, why that is natural to have. And monsters have always been an attraction to humans, and not only because they're scary, but something about the kind of the liberation of just letting yourself go and doing whatever you want at that time is quite attractive.
So you undertook all sorts of things to write the book, didn't you? You travelled up north to the site of a British werewolf sighting, a ghost tour. You travelled to Pennsylvania, was it, in search of vampire myths? What was your favourite experience whilst researching the book? I
mean, certainly being in Transylvania was just a wonderful experience. And I was staying in an old Saxon village, and I got to kind of interview the daughter of the village wise woman about their kind of strigoi, which is this idea of a kind of vampire demon type thing, but being able to do that in a location where there's literally like wolves howling in the hills, and it being in a hammer horror type scenario was just absolutely wonderful. And then going up in the Carpathian Mountains and staying in a hotel made of ice. This was all like stuff I'd wanted to do anyway, but to be able to do it as part of a book was just fantastic. But then even some of the fun experiences, like in the werewolf chapter, that starts with me and this historian called Mike Coville, and I went to Sainsbury's to buy some peppered steak and put a string around it, and me and him dragged it up and down the waterways of Hull, where 9 different witnesses had seen what they claimed was a werewolf. And so those sorts of experiences were a lot of fun. But then there was another part of that where I did something with the BBC where I got put into a Land Rover with blindfold on, and then blind driven to a mansion in the middle of nowhere, where me and some other people went through a whole evening of grueling experiences, being strapped to electric chairs and, put in rooms with hidden infrasound speakers and ghost simulations and just crazy stuff to understand why it was so thrilling. So yes, there was loads of fun activities with that. It was a blast to write that book.
Did you try the psychomantium when ASEP had it at their conference?
No, I didn't. I did film. I filmed the witnesses that came out. Psychomantium being this idea of being inside an enclosed environment. We used like a gazebo type tent where it's very dark and you look at yourself in a mirror for a long period of time, and in that darkness and in that state, you can start to see things that, are they hallucinations or are they seeing into another realm? But I didn't fancy doing that myself. So I
tried it. I didn't really have anything. Like a lot of people were saying they saw burnt faces and things like that. But
yes, yeah.
It's a little bit like when people use Black Mirror, isn't it? And they're scrying. I think it's a similar sort of experience, except you've got sound as well to try and stimulate the experience.
That's right. Well, one of the things I learned by writing The Frighteners was like when the hotel I stayed in when I was on this werewolf hunt, it turned out that the hotel was haunted. I didn't know this. And so the manager took us down into the basement and we were able to find like a barber shop that they used to have, which had this murderer who used to work there. And so I looked into their case. And then after the book came out, I was getting emails from the murder victim's family, the murderer's family, the police's family, because they were trying to find out more information about this case that I'd looked into. But anyway, while I was in the hotel, like there was some just weird, oppressive, paranormal potential feelings, or it could have been in my head, but I had a very kind of scary feeling in that hotel over the night, and I didn't enjoy it. And I started to realize that actually having a communal scary experience or a scary experience that I can externally validate as not just in my head, that's attractive. But the idea of having a scary experience that I can't work out, did I hallucinate that or not? That's not very enjoyable to me because it makes you think you could be going insane. So the idea of sitting in a psychomantium and just being alone and coming out saying, well, I saw a burned figure over my shoulder. I just thought, it's almost like getting hypnotized. These people who go to hypnotists and they get up and I'm like, I don't fancy doing that. Because what happens if it locks something in my brain, then later someone says the keyword eclipse and I fall asleep or something? A-Team reference there. But so there are some scary things I really love, like being in being chased by actors dressed as zombies in an underground nuclear bunker. That was absolutely thrilling. It was so much fun. But being I was in New England speaking last Halloween, so the Halloween before last, and they put me up in a mansion. It was amazing, this New England mansion, and they said you could stay here for the month, and I'm like, that would be wonderful, but I'm not staying here for the whole month by myself, because what happens if I see stuff and I can't explain it? I'd rather see stuff with other people, and then we can verify with one another. Anyway, I did end up seeing some weird stuff that I made a video about it, but yeah, I prefer to do things, I think, on the whole, when other people are with me, not just because it's more fun, then you can categorize it more effectively afterwards.
I was intrigued by the section on murderabilia, where people collect items connected to criminals. I think we're all fascinated by the dark and grisly to some degree. I remember being fascinated by seeing Simon of Sudbury's head in a church near me, where it was cut off during the Peasants' Revolt, and they've kept it ever since, rather
Oh,
gruesomely.
okay.
And I've always kind of wanted to see William Burke's Skin Diary or something, or book, something.
Oh, yes.
Something
Yeah.
The Resurrectionist in Edinburgh.
Mhm.
But I stopped short of collecting these things myself. Why do you feel people are drawn to collect such dark objects?
Why do people collect memorabilia, murderabilia? It's quite complex. And I think at the time when I first started writing that chapter, that was that was definitely the most disturbing chapter to write, because that was asking something that's beyond me. I love horror and I love scary stuff and monsters and ghosts and all that sort of stuff. But I at the time I did feel more disturbed by things like serial killers, and that used to freak me out, because not only was I worried that was real and they could come for me, but secondly, it was like real victims and real people, and I felt a bit uncomfortable about the potential of glorifying what happened to them. And I remember for that chapter, I interviewed a man in America who was the chair of the Committee for Parents of Murdered Children. And I just remember just on the call thinking, oh my goodness, there's a WhatsApp group for people whose kids have been murdered. And I'm like, this is awful. So there's a caution about that. However, talking to people who like serial, and I'm interested in serial killing and all, serial killers, I should say. You start to realize it's still the same. It's just we live lives that's not really surrounded by much death. Some people are. Some people live in countries where it's happening all around them. Whether or not you're in like Iran or Gaza right now. There's places where it's an everyday occurrence. But right now, in Britain at least, or America or other places like that, we don't really witness a great deal of crime and murder right in front of us. We see it on TV and we see it in the news. And therefore, there's something in us that says, well, look, this sort of stuff exists, and I want to try and explore it in some way that's safe. It's a little bit like Stephen King, who used to collect scrap cuttings. That's in a scrapbook, like cuttings from the newspaper about the serial killer Charlie Starkweather. And he was asked, do you glorify in what he's doing? Do you like this? And he said, well, no, I am fascinated, but I want to know what to look for in a person. So if I ever meet someone like that, I can run away. So there's a sort of self-preservation thing in kind of be protected from these people. But there's also an enigma, which is why would someone do this? Almost like not compassion, but a sense of like a puzzle that needs to be solved. Why would someone feel it's okay to murder 30 women? Like, that's so beyond my own thinking that we can't help but be interested in that, because it's just such an interesting puzzle. And so the high stakes thrill and the drama of it, alongside the reality, and weirdly the comfort of these stories. Sometimes people find horror and even true crime weirdly comforting, because it's a collection of real facts bound up in a story. So people are just drawn to this, and I learned to realize that it's just the same principle as why I'm drawn to monsters and vampires and ghosts. It doesn't, if you like serial killers, it doesn't mean that you're a serial killer yourself by any stretch.
My husband's always, I don't think appalled is quite the right word, but because I like to watch modern day forensic CSI things, like, especially British ones, to see how they solve the crime. And he's always appalled because obviously there's always a horrible murder. And it's like, why would you want to watch that? But I mean, for me, that's because I like to find out how they solve it.
Exactly.
But and I think with these, like the Simon's Head, it happened so many hundreds of years ago. I feel time has distanced me from the horribleness of it. But
even down to the principle of you're driving in your car on a motorway or something, and then there's a car crash, and there is this thing inside you that says, "Look at that! Look at that!" And again, people can feel, "Oh gosh, there's something wrong with me. I must enjoy this death and destruction," but you just don't. Your brain is as kind of is a survival machine. That it's like, oh, hang on a minute, this happened to that person. This is the road I'm driving on. What can I do? What information can I gather from what I've seen today that will ensure that that doesn't happen to me? And this does happen. If you see a crash on a motorway, it will. And I think the quote I use in the book maybe is like I say, horror shocks us into wisdom, and that will do that. You'll suddenly go, right, forget it. I'm not going to faff around with Spotify just to find which song I want to listen while I'm driving, or I'm not going to check a message. I am going to keep to the speed limit. I am going to watch the road. And you might do that more likely when you know someone has just lost their life next to you. So there is a kind of weird, kind of instructive nature of these stories. And it's not a surprise that we keep almost like a kind of evolutionary survival instinct to say, it's a good idea to think there's a monster in the woods, kids. Don't go out there. And let's tell stories that emphasize that, because it could be dangerous in the woods. And sometimes there are bad things in the woods that could get you.
I remember the Dark Waters information film from like the 70s or something, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. I've got that guy. Hang on a minute. Yeah, I've got that little fella. It's just a birthday present.
And how do you feel horror will change with the advent of new technologies?
Well, I mean, technology has always been a great vehicle for, us trying to understand ourselves. So be that from like novels or videotape and cinema, it's all of these technologies are just platforms on which we try to understand the human condition and also to enjoy our journey as humans, but to understand it. So I don't really see, in some ways, the technology doesn't really matter because the message is still the same. One, we like adventure. Two, we're frightened of many things. Three, we have deep questions about what happens after death, before we were born, like, all these big, deep theological questions. Not everyone thinks that, but a lot of people do. A need for significance and security and all these sorts of things. So I think so we'll explore those things through AI or through video games or through digital, but I don't think it changes. It just changes maybe the ability for people to have access to those sorts of tools, maybe. I know a lot of people are saying really against AI, for example. I understand some of the reasons why they would be, but the flip side of that would be, well, I'm not a very good artist, so I can't demonstrate what my feel looks like. But I guess there'd be more opportunity for an everyday non-artistic person to type in what they like, almost like a photo fit. This is the thing I see at night when I sleep, over and over and over again. That's it. That's the thing. It's captured it for me. So I guess that's the only way that this could be a new development in fear. But ultimately, it's just doing the same thing as books and stories have always done.
I saw something this week. I didn't research whether it was true or not, but it said something about people living to like over 200 years old. And I thought, for me, that's pretty horrifying because, okay, yeah, your mum might live to 200, but also a serial killer might live to 200 or something. Or people
well,
you really don't want to be living to 200.
That's a big kill. That's an impressive kill count if you can keep going all that time.
Yeah.
I love technology. I'm a very kind of technologically optimistic. I'm an optimistic person anyway, but I'm optimistic about society. I'm optimistic about humanity, and I'm optimistic about technology. And I get all of the bad stuff as well. I understand that, but I think if we do continue to grow until we're 200 years old, technology is most likely going to make that better. I do some chaplaincy work in a retirement home. I mean, I'm kind of full-time with YouTube now, but I do still do some chaplaincy with retired people and like elderly people and lead kind of like groups about culture and talking about politics and life and art and all that sort of stuff. And this particular generation might not have really embraced the internet necessarily, so they're watching their channels on TV and reading their newspapers. But when I'm in an old people's home, it's not that long to go maybe. When I'm doing that, I'm going to be having my VR headset on. I already play on that sort of stuff. I always play video games. I'm going to be hanging out with my friends, even if I can't walk and I'm sat in a wheelchair. I'm going to be chatting with them. I'm probably going to be visiting them through the technology. So to me, I'm optimistic about the future.
Moving on to your Matt Hunter series, can you tell us what it's about?
Yeah, Matt Hunter. Hang on. Yeah, these are excellent novels. Got to tell you. No, they're all right. Matt Hunter. These are the books. Well, this is one of them. There's 4 of them. I wrote these novels before the Frighteners, as I mentioned, and the main they're like they're crime fiction, I should say, with elements of the supernatural and horror, and have been described as scary, which is great for me. And the main character is a man called Matt Hunter, who is an ex-church minister who goes through something very traumatic in the first book and then turns his back on religion and becomes an atheist sociology professor. And because he has all of this knowledge of religion and cults and the paranormal as well, but also because he has such cosmic issues with God and with religion, he helps the police track down Christian evangelical serial killers or weird kind of religious cults. So in the first book, Purged, there's a serial killer who believes that the only true way of evangelizing the world and making people right with God is to get people to become Christians. And then once they make that confession, to murder them immediately afterwards, because then they're not going to lose their faith. Because this is a thing I hear in church sometimes. People will go, oh, well, it's all well and good. That person's there and they've found their faith. But what happens in 5 years' time? They might lose their faith and then they might lose their place in heaven. These sorts of things that I've heard some people say. So a natural offshoot of that is to, kill them while they're right with God, and then they'll be fast-tracked to heaven. Surely that's a better thing to do for society. Now, obviously, I do not think that's true by any stretch, but the killer in this book does. And so Matt is trying to help the police track down this killer while he comes for his family. Yeah, it's a fun book.
I found a great review for the first book, Purged. A thriller that dares to tackle faith and fanaticism. Peter Laws opens Purged with a murder scene that sets the tone immediately. Dark, intense, and psychologically unsettling. What makes this novel compelling is the exploration of religious extremism through a deeply disturbed antagonist who believes that murder is a form of salvation.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good review. Don't know who wrote that. I like that. But yeah, it does explore religious fanaticism because I grew up not a Christian. I became a Christian in my early 20s. And up until that point, I was very anti-church and very anti-religion. And in some ways, I'm still quite anti-church and religion when the expression of that religion is so blinkered and kind of negative. And so, yeah, I do kind of share some of the same frustrations as Matt Hunter, but I'm not prepared to just jettison the whole thing. I do think there's something to be said about the value of having some sort of faith. Well, for me, I'm not saying for everyone else, but I'm just saying for me, there's something powerful about that. And I do think we live in a mysterious universe, particularly with the paranormal and all that sort of thing. So, it's still important to me. But Matt has turned his back on all of that. However, he keeps meeting people who thoroughly believe it.
And how does Matt's battle with his own faith help or hinder him in his investigations?
Well, it helps him in the sense that he has great knowledge. So, if in the third book, Severed, he's on the hunt. He's trying to help deal with this weird cult, this Scottish cult who that book opens with a priest, doing communion, and then his son just steps out like during the service and just starts like hacking this guy's head off with an axe in front of the congregation. Obviously, they're a bit horrified by that. But the idea of that book is there's this cult who believe that in Christianity, you've got God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, which is supposed to be this like pure community of love. But this cult believe, no, it's not that. It's that God the Father was hopelessly jealous of Jesus the Son, who became famous and was seen as the conduit and all that sort of stuff. And so it was God the Father who murdered Jesus the Son on the cross. He didn't die for the world. He was brutally murdered by his own father, almost like a kind of Greek God type thing. I don't know. That's not a real cult. That just came to my mind one day. I was like, you could read it like that. But Matt is able to, because of his knowledge of theology, is able to go, wait a minute, like, as they're piecing together these things, like this father's being killed, or there's something's going on. There's upturned crucifixes. Does this mean is this satanic? And it's like, no, they're Christians who reject a certain view of Christianity, that the cross is not a hopeful thing. It's a sign of God the Father's petty jealousy. So again, these aren't things I believe, but because of that knowledge he has, he's able to help the police understand certain things like that. The fourth book, Possessed, is about demonic possession and about the world's first televised mass exorcism. And he's brought in for a reality TV show, Matt, to try and kind of help and support that. And again, he can support that and help people understand. So it helps, but it also hinders him, I suppose, because of this blinkered assumption that all religious people are nutcases, which is just not the case. So yeah, but on the whole, it helps him.
So Matt is a minister who's lost his faith, but since I've known you, you strike me as someone with strong faith. You're an ordained minister yourself. Is writing Matt a cathartic way of exploring any questions or doubts you might have about your own faith? Or has it strengthened your own faith?
Well, I kind of, it's weird. I'm not keen on the idea of being presented as a person with strong faith, because that to me, that just suggests a certain type of person, which I'm not. And this might just be me reading into it, but when I think of someone with strong faith, I think of someone who is fundamentalist maybe, or traditionalist, or is really like locked into this one thing. Whereas I'm known as a bit of a heretic amongst certain Christians. I've been, like the church I was speaking at and doing it for a lot of speaking and helping at, not that a few years ago said, oh, you can't do this anymore, because I was fine with people being gay, for example. So like there's a lot of things that I don't relate to. Like, I don't use the word evangelical. That's a word that many Christians would proudly own, but I don't own that at all. I'm not trying to talk about these issues because I'm trying to save people from the darkness and pull them into the light. I'm really just a kind of fellow traveler, who has found this to be helpful personally, and does think that Jesus' approach to life, forgiveness, loving others, radical empathy for even the worst. I do think that's like the secret of life. It's like the secret of survival as a human being. But I don't like the word religious, because that implies a certain type of image. I think I'm just like contrarian, maybe. I don't like labels. So like yeah. I've got faith. I've definitely got faith, but I've got plenty of doubts. Sometimes I wonder, does God even exist? Which I find that's completely reasonable for faith people to think that. But on the whole, I do point towards yes. And the more and more I hear, particularly of people's paranormal stories, the more I believe, well, something is going on in this world that cannot be explained naturally. And that just puts more and more evidence on the possibility of there being a divine creator in my mind.
You gave a really good talk about that, didn't you? About paranormal becoming a new religion, which was
Yeah, I did. Yes.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a thing I was just starting to observe, that a lot of the people who had kind of say, well, that religion isn't for me. I'm not probably for the same reasons I've just said. I don't want to be pigeonholed into a certain type of character. I'm not Harold Bishop. I'm not Dot Cotton. I'm not Cliff Richard. But ultimately they share so much in terms of trying to seek answers, trying to seek community around a metaphysical quest. That's what church people do, and that's what paranormal people do. So there's a lot we share.
I've read at this point most of Purged. I haven't quite finished it yet, but I like your description.
You get bored.
Style. I'm just a bit of a slow reader.
That's all right.
It's got lots of references to modern culture within it. So you called something a Godzilla-sized version of the King James Bible, for example, and
Did I?
the granite pillars of the church as being like the legs of the fighting machines from War of the Worlds.
Oh yeah.
So I thought it was unusual, and I really like those descriptions. But it's not something probably I stylistically would think to write.
Yeah.
So is this just a reflection of you and your interests, or is it a stylistic choice to use words like that?
Well, I guess it's both. But I do when I was writing those books, I did try to treat my writing days as almost like a diary of what was happening to me at that time. So, just as some sort of like subtle, subliminal record keeping. And so if I maybe mentioned the War of the Worlds, it might have been because I was listening to the War of the Worlds album that day and I thought, how can I include that? Or it might be the opposite. And, it might just be, I just find images come to my mind like instantly. So, I don't sit there writing and think, no, what could I use to describe the legs of a fighting machine and the pillars of a church? Like I'm not trying to think of a image. It's just there within milliseconds, and so I just decide, yeah, I'll use that one. So yeah, it's almost just like subliminal appears, and it's based on what I've done that day, maybe. And I do keep a little notepad. I mean, I like interesting phrases that come to mind. I just write all of them down. Tons
Likewise,
of phrases. Yeah.
And are you a planner when you write, or are you seat of your pants kind of writer, or a bit of both?
No, I'd say I'm a planner. But I'm a loose planner in the sense that like I don't tend to start writing a book without knowing where I'm going with it. And I know some people think that's a bad way of doing it because they'll be like, if you know how it ends, then how can it be surprising? But to me, I'm like, I don't want to waste my time writing a book that halfway through I decide, oh, you know what? Now I think about it, this hasn't got a good ending. So I'll work on, I'll get idea, concept, and the idea is normally related to a kind of a philosophical concept or something, or an idea like that. But then I just start building up the story. But I'll just write down maybe, wouldn't it be weird if a guy got his head chopped off in a church service? Right, okay, write that down. And then what would that lead to? But sometimes that comes later because I'll think, it has to be something about fathers because my concept about this is this weird twisted Trinity thing. So we'll start with a father. But yeah, I'll maybe write like a loose idea of the plot line. So I've got pretty much a rough idea of everything that's going to happen. And then once I go, yeah, that seems consistent. That seems to work. That's satisfying. Then I'll go and actually write the book. But then things can change. Then I can be halfway through and go, wait a minute, I never thought of that. Or a character does something you're not expecting. And then, of course, you change. And that's fine. And that's what keeps it alive. But to start a book that I've got no idea is even worth finishing, well, I'm not that type of person.
I changed my murderer in both books before the end because just that works better.
Oh.
Actually, I'm going to change that. So yeah, I do that all the time.
Yeah, and I've never like I don't think I've really done anything that I've started and not finished. I just don't really. I'm. It's not enough time in life to do that. For me personally, I know loads of people I've met who are writers, and they'll say like, "Oh, I've got like a drawer full of things that I've started and not finished." Which I think that's why I want to make sure I have a roadmap at least to tell me if it's worth doing or not.
Are you still writing at the moment?
Not books, because making a living as a full-time author is just really, really hard. But it turns out, being YouTuber is way more predictable. It's like it's more sane to be a creative person in that sort of space. So, and that involves loads of writing. So I'm writing all the time and researching all the time, and I'm getting the same buzz out of creating an episode, because sometimes they're like feature length every 2 weeks. But then it fulfills that sense of completion because you're like start, finish, end, done, out, next, dude. And that's what it was almost like with books. So yeah, I'd like the idea of going back to do another book, but that's a lot of time to write a book, and it's not necessarily, for me at least, the most wise and sensible use of the time financially.
You're an accomplished musician too, and have written a soundtrack for your Matt Hunter series. Why did you decide to combine the two?
I used to want to be a composer when I was a teenager. I wanted to be a writer, and then I'll be a composer, and I started joining bands, and I was like touring in a band and things, and that was kind of my thing for a little bit. Well, I just like creativity, and I just like having a blank space and then making something that wasn't there, and then moving on to do the other thing. So with I used to always write soundtracks to films. Like I would go to watch a film, I don't know, Titanic or something, and I go, oh, I enjoyed that. I'll go home now and I'll write the alternative soundtrack to that. I used to do that with novels. I would read like horror novels, just something to do, really. It's like a nice thing. And I decided to do that with the first two books. But then I started realizing actually that's a little bit indulgent time wise. But then I did when I've got a podcast that came out during COVID called Cove Community Church, which is I've got that there because I just have this on my shelf, but I might as well grab it. Which is like a horror themed church service, and it's basically full and immersive church services for people to listen to, but it's exploring well-being and faith as if you're going to a church with characters from horror films, and it's a mixture of comedy and well-being and weirdness. But for that, I would write a full like horror hymn. So like so I play all the instruments and just create. So there's like three Creepy Cove albums out.
When you're pregnant with the devil's child, you've got to laugh. And your dad gets bitten and goes hog wild, you've got to laugh. When you send your kids to summer camp, but they can't be found, so you grab a lamp and you find their backpacks red and damp, you got to laugh. When the townsfolk all are evil fish, you got to laugh. And when to bury your son is your final wish, you got to laugh. When you're finally connected with your wife and you have the best night of your life, but you end up stabbed by a dwarf with a knife, you got to laugh. You've got to laugh. You've got to laugh. Make a miracle by giggling. You gotta get that belly jiggling. Just laugh. You've got to laugh. It's a ha 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 life, so laugh.
Did you win an award for some of your music? Did I see?
Did I? Oh, there might have been something for one of the soundtracks. Yeah, there was for the first soundtrack. There was an award. I forgot about that. That was amazing. I haven't had an award for the music albums, which is a travesty because really they're probably better. But yeah, I forgot about that. It wasn't a big fancy award. I didn't have to go to the Kodak Theater in LA or something.
Nice to have recognition though. But I listened to some of it when I was doing the questions. It was very good.
Oh, cool. Oh, thank you.
Is it possible to hear some of the music? Can you play some, or can we play some on the podcast?
Yeah, feel free to play some. I don't actually know how to play any of it to you here right now. I don't know how I would do that, but feel free to mix something in if you want. Otherwise, if you go to Spotify to search for Peter Laws, you'll find the Creepy Cove albums. And there's songs there about like films like Children of the Corn or The Thing, or it's I just find like the creative itch to me, it doesn't really matter what the medium is, in the same way as I talked about technology. I don't really have a particular, I must write books, I must make music, I must make videos. It's almost like the quest, and maybe creatives out there will understand this. The quest is to find which creative pursuit can I find that at least earns enough money so that it's reasonable for me to do this a lot. And some people might have a privileged situation where they can just do it anyway, but not everyone does that. So having a YouTube channel, I love, because it's creative and it's collaborative. But if it was music, if I was writing music for films, I'd love that too. If it was actually writing books that sustained a living, I'd love that too. It's whatever ticks the box, really.
Do you feel that reading and watching horror stories can help people deal with issues in their real lives?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I would say that's one of the reasons why we consume any like art or culture. It's to have fun, and escapism is very important. And even the escapism itself is dealing with the issues of our life. But what would we do in our time off if we didn't have entertainment? We would maybe go for a walk or something, which is great, and spend time with other people. But entertainment is really important. And I mean all forms of entertainment. I hate like the whole highbrow, lowbrow differentiation. Me and my daughter like addicted to Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, the reality show. Love that stuff. And just as much as I'll happily watch some sort of like really highbrow, deep play. To me, it's all, there's no such thing as like bad art or good art. That's just opinion.
And you've had some spooky experiences yourself. Can you describe any of them to us?
Well, it's probably take a bit too long for me to describe them in detail, but you can go on my YouTube channel and discover there's 2 videos that I explore. There's one that I had in my teenage years in 1993, which I discovered. I kept my diaries from then, and I wrote about what happened to me then, and I decided to make an episode out of that. And that was just me having a very strange experience with some friends, which I really still can't explain today. And then the other video was about when I went to this New England mansion and was quite freaked out about just being there, but then woke up at 3 a.m. with feeling somebody grabbing my ankles and then bouncing my legs up and down on the bed, and having my eyes closed and then gradually opening them and nothing being there, and then later the bed, while I was sitting there, the bed kind of going down and then feeling someone coming to lie on top of me, or like on this side. And that was very, very intense. And I appreciate people might be like, you were dreaming or whatever, but maybe I was, but it was really, really quite scary. And the next day I just like ran over to the library, because this mansion was part of a library, and said, this thing happened to me. And they were like, what time did it happen? And about 3 a.m. And you're in this room, aren't you? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, well, have you seen the journal that we leave for the writers in residence? And I did find that journal later. And other authors had said the same thing had happened to them in that room. So it was really, really, it was, in the end, it was actually quite a wonderful experience once I'd stayed there for a few more days. But that first night, I was crapping myself. I had all the lights on. I didn't have a hire car at that point. So I was like, I'm in different country, don't know where I'm going to go if I see something. But again, if I'd been with friends, it would have been super exciting. But I'm sitting here now and I'm like, I don't know for certain if it was in my head or not. That's the bit that I find scary.
It's always 3 a.m., isn't it, that things seem to happen? I don't know why everybody's story is 3 a.m.
It is, yeah. 3 a.m. eternal.
The witching hour, as they call it, I think. You've successfully moved from writing to creating a YouTube channel, Into the Fog. You also had your pod, the creepy Cove Community Church, before that.
Yeah.
Why do you feel the urge to expand into podcasting? Has it helped your writing at all?
Yeah. I mean, it creates the discipline of writing to deadlines. I think that's a good discipline to have. I think when I was writing my books before they got published, I instituted my own deadlines. And my wife would sometimes say, like, why are you being so hardcore writing this? Like, no one needs you to finish this. And I'm like, yeah, but the boss in my head is saying this book needs to be completed by September 4th. And if I don't, I'm going to let that boss down. And she's like, there is no boss. That's you. And I'm like, yeah, but how am I supposed to finish things if I don't employ an end point? And also, I think there's something to be said about like pressure and economy of time with creativity. Sometimes you find some of the great horror directors, some of their earlier films are scarier and better when they had lower budgets and they had time restrictions and they had to just go, oh, well, let's just go with this or go with that. And then you see their later films where they've got multiple amounts of millions, and more time. And it's like, there's something missing. So sometimes I think being forced to be quick can actually create a better product, if that's the right word. That's just me, though. I don't know if it's about other people. But so with YouTube, that just has that inbuilt conveyor belt thing, which I find quite satisfying. And also with writing as well, I'd encourage people. I started looking into YouTube because I thought, well, it's hard to make a living from books, and so I need to start like finding other ways. And I'm like, oh, what's the next thing? You think really obviously, and you go, oh, well, maybe I'll write articles for magazines. And then you start approaching magazines and newspapers. And yes, I've been able to write some articles, but you can only write so many of those. And then I'm like, wait a minute, if I go on like Indeed, like the job website, and type in script writer or whatever, and then you start getting jobs on YouTube, because all these channels that, have I do almost all of the writing myself for my channel, although I've had occasionally someone help out when time's been tough. But a lot of these like big channels that have got videos coming out all the time, they employ writers to write the scripts. And they'll get credit and everything like that. But I think writers don't realize that that's a whole market for writing. And it pays way better than writing a blog or something like that, or that sort of thing. So if you want to make a living from it, that it's worth exploring that.
I've listened to quite a lot of the stories, particularly anything ghosty, poltergeists and my thing.
Yeah.
But no, they're really good. So I recommend anybody having a listen. And you've reached 176,000 followers. I saw this morning.
Subscribers, yeah, which is it's
yeah.
amazing, and it's like getting like 1.1 million views a month.
Wow.
Which is just incredible. But it's weird with subscribers. Like I never really asked for subscribers because well, it's be a bit boring, but like it's important to get 1,000 subscribers because then you unlock monetization. But after that, subscribers aren't as important as they used to be. It's all about engagement. So if people are watching your video till the end, if they're commenting or if they're liking, that's what makes YouTube share things with more people. They don't just share just because you've got a lot of subscribers. But it's really lovely to have that many subscribers. It makes a big difference. But I'd rather have like 175,000 engaged people than have 2 million subscribers and only have 175,000 engaged people. Because it's try to focus on the people that are there. So I barely ever ask for subscribers. Maybe I should look into that.
So which of the cases that you've included in the pod has affected you most? In the YouTube channel, I should say.
When I told my own story from 1993, particularly, I was quite shocked at how upsetting it was. Like, I told the story to camera, and then after, like, normally when I finish, sometimes that I do get emotionally attached to the stories because these are real people. Like tonight, we're doing a Zoom call with a family who've gone through something in Kentucky. So these are real people that you're talking to, but on the whole, you can separate yourself. But doing that story, and at the end of it, I just burst into tears, and I'm like, "Oh man, I'm gonna have to cut that bit out." It looks so weird, and I'm like, "What? Wow!" And I just was not expecting the emotional trauma, maybe, of going through something. And my thing wasn't even that big, and that was very instructive to me, not only of my own thoughts and feelings, but of people who share their stories and the empathy I think we need for them. And what was really instructive about that video was just seeing almost all the comments were very positive, but then seeing the odd comment that would say, well, it's obvious he's lying because the ink in his diary entry that he shared on screen, most of it was black, but some of it was blue. So he's a fraud. He's made this up. And that was really helpful for me to see that, because I'm like, it's true. Like I wrote this as a teenager. I don't go back to my own diaries like 30 years later or whatever. Like, what are you talking about? But they just instantly thought it must be a lie based on the most flimsy of assumptions. And that was helpful for me to see for other people who go through other things, to say you can't just jump to conclusions that quickly. You don't know.
I think it's very hard for people to believe unless they've experienced something themselves, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
You're a massive horror buff, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So you wake up one morning to find yourself living in one of these horror stories. Which book or film are you living in, and how would you react in the same situation? Would you react the same as the protagonist, or perhaps you'd prefer to be the antagonist?
Well, that's a good question. I do quite like, I love horror films where I'm a kind of first half of a horror film as opposed to a second half person. So in some ways, like Jaws, like you can work out someone's personality by asking them like which half of Jaws do they like the best. Is it the first half when they're in the town and the mysterious creature in the sea is killing people and people don't know for certain, is it there, is it not? Or you're the second half when there's like the big confrontation and at sea. I'm the first half type of person. And so I love the idea of being involved in a kind of small town horror, like Salem's Lot, maybe by Stephen King, where you're just living in this town and then people are starting to get murdered, like in weird ways, or killed. And you're just starting to gradually suspect something creepy is afoot. And so I kind of find that quite exciting, the idea of living in a town where some sort of evil force is sort of taking over and the community as a whole is part of that. I mean, I wouldn't actually want to live in that because that's scary. And equally, zombie films, I write about this in the Frighteners. I mean, sometimes you can get fatigued with zombie films, but apocalyptic zombie type films where you've got to survive, I look at those sometimes and I think, you know what, I'd like to see what it would be like to live in a world where most people have gone and I can just like pooch around at everyone's house and just like explore and build a life and try and find other survivors. Like there's something quite attractive about that type of horror, because it probably illustrates how ill-equipped we are for societal collapse. I mean, we're only like 9 meals away from anarchy, apparently. Like if society goes without 9 meals in a row, everything falls apart then. Like then your neighbor's going to be kicking your door down because their baby is dying or struggling without food. And that's when everything changes. So we're so unprepared for that something in your mind goes, oh, I'd like to learn how to be prepared for that. And zombie films and apocalyptic films can do that. So maybe I'd be in that too, but not for real. Let's just make that clear.
The Exorcist is one of your favorite films, isn't it?
Yeah, I love The Exorcist. I've just been reading a book about Exorcist 2, the John Borman sequel, which is not good. I've kind of liked it myself in some ways, but reading the book is making me realize just what a misfire it was. But no, the original Exorcist, yeah, it was quite pivotal on my faith journey, to be honest. And yeah, would I want to be part of that? I don't well, not if it was my daughter, crikey. No thanks. Or the vicar in that. Definitely not. They don't come out well.
You have a sinister minister reputation. Have you ever?
Yeah, sounds like something you read in a tabloid newspaper on page 6, which is not a good one.
Have you ever had any backlash from people as a minister who writes about horror?
Yeah, I've had that, and people who would say that it's inappropriate. Not as much as I thought. I get far more backlash from people from Christians because of some of my kind of social views, like for example mentioning about gay people. You know, that's much more problematic than me liking horror to some people. But yeah, some people like struggle with it. Like for example, like last night I watched the new Nicolas Cage film, The Carpenter's Son, about the teenage life of Jesus, and it's classed as a horror film, but I thought it was very good. But loads of Christians to say that's really blasphemous. You shouldn't watch that because it's based on the infancy gospel of Thomas, which is not really it's considered a heretical book. So, but I don't think God is bothered that much by blasphemy. But by what I mean is that I think God understands people's heart. God looks at people's hearts, and sometimes the people making blasphemous art are doing so because they're reacting against a quite legitimate upset that maybe they've had with religious people in their past. It's not necessarily aimed at God. Some might be. So yeah, I'm super chilled out, which does annoy people, religious people. But I can't do anything else. It's just how I am. I'm not acting that.
And can fans meet you in person anywhere this year?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing a book signing in Oxford Street, HMV soon, but I haven't got the exact date for that yet. We're waiting for that to be confirmed. I'm going to be in Louth, speaking at a conference in a few weeks' time. Again, I can't remember dates. Like I should have written them down. But that's at the Weird and the Wold. I'll be at Strange Days Festival, which is in Warwickshire. That's in September, I think. And yeah, I do sort of crop up in different places, and would be delighted to meet people.
Strange Days looks really fun. It's like it's paranormal and music, isn't it? And you can
Yeah.
and it was Brian Blessed talking last year, was it, or something?
That's right. Yes, yeah. Yeah,
Did you
he
get
was.
to meet him?
I was on just a couple before him. Sadly, not, because I had a YouTube live almost straight after I did my talk, so I had to kind of disappear and go to that, and then I caught the end. But no, Strange Days was a lot of fun. But yeah, these YouTube lives, my episodes come out every Saturday, but we put them out live as a live premiere, and then I'm able to be there in the chat, so we can talk to people and people can engage in that way, and develop a real great community. And what's great about Into the Fog is, like, it really is a community in the sense of, like, we ask for voice actors if anyone wants to volunteer to be part of the episodes, and people from all around the world send in their voice work. We get, like, the episode that's coming out set in Canada on Saturday. We have volunteers in Canada who drive an hour to go to the location and get footage for us, and it's a really wonderful kind of connection with people, as well as, like, the scary stories.
And finally, where can people find you online?
On peterlaws.co.uk. If you just search Peter Laws in Google, you'll find me. But the main home for me, I suppose, is on YouTube, Into the Fog with Peter Laws. But if you just write Into the Fog or Peter Laws, it'll come up in theory. But peterlaws.co.uk has more to do with, like, my books as well as YouTube. Oh, I also have a Patreon, and that's patreon.com/Peter Laws, and people can find me there, providing kind of extra content and connection with people who like what I do, which is very satisfying.
Thanks very much for talking to me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure talking to you, Karen.
And for everyone that's listening, we'll see you next time on the pod. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
There are stories galore in volumes by the score on every subject throughout history.